Hey friends, it's Jess with Virtually Visual, and today we're going to be creating this really cool growth effect that you see here on this animation on screen. This was a fun little project that kind of just came out of nowhere, and you've probably seen Vertex growth before, like tutorials for it on YouTube, but we're also going to be growing some particles, these little bubbles here, and then I'll show you how I made my little material. So it's going to be pretty straightforward, but really fun, and there's going to be some more technical techniques in here for the Vertex stuff, but overall you should be able to follow it regardless of where you're at with your Cinema 4D skills. So I'm excited to dive in and let's get started. I do want to mention that what I would typically do is go to like the Bridge app. If you used Quixel before, this is where you would get all your mega scans, and now you can see we have this pop-up that says a new home for mega scans, and everything in here used to be free, and I think that was really amazing, and they gave so much. I just want you to know that there is still stuff available for free. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to close this. I have it pulled up here actually. So if you search for like Quixel or Mega Scans or whatever, you're going to end up here on Fab. And what I did was I just went to the top and I filtered under price. I just chose only free models. So everything you see here is free and you can download and use in your scenes. Okay, so here are all of our free models. This gives us a better picture of what to look for. So both of these you have to buy. Okay, we're gonna end up doing this one because it's free. So it may take some hunting, but you can find some free models. This is not my favorite just because the shape is strange, but we'll do it. So we're gonna go to the high quality FBX, download. Let's import that model into Cinema. So I've extracted the folder, the zip folder that we got. So I'm going to import that tree branch. We've got it. Let's pull it upwards. And now we can apply our materials. So we're going to create a standard material. And this process is much more manual than it would have been with Quixel because it would have just imported the materials for us. But now that we're doing Fab, we have to do this kind of manually. So here in our old tree folder, I'm going to pull in the maps I know I'm going to use, and then I'm just going to drag these over so they're not over top of my material. Here we're going to connect our base color. Displacement we'll drag over here if we want to use it. Boss I think I'll plug into the coat weight. And let's pull in a bump map. And we'll plug in our normal map and we'll change from height field to object space normal. And let me see what color the actual branch was, because this looks different. I think we need to set maybe our textures to raw, which you can find in File.io raw. That should help bring some detail back in. And change the color. So that's kind of what we're looking for. So sometimes setting the images instead of auto, if you set them to raw, you can bring some more detail into your scene. We can start working on the effect. First thing we're going to do is we're going to rename our model to branch. And we're going to right click and we're going to find the other tag section and we're going to add our vertex map. One other thing to note before we actually get started, let me exit my camera view. We're going to zoom in here and hit N and B in our keyboard. Let's hide our backdrop, and I'm going to turn off materials just for the moment. So this is the mesh density of our tree branch. So this isn't even, and it's not super high poly, which could mean our balloon sim that we're going to be creating isn't going to be super detailed because it will only grow like the edges of it will just be filling some of these polygons. So it's not like half a polygon can get pushed outwards, it's going to just push out whole polygons. So this might be too low density, honestly. Remeshing this, let's try that now. And we can set adaptiveness maybe to 15. So we still have all our textures there, but it's just remeshed the branch for us, which is kind of nice. So at 100, that's what we're looking at. And I do think that could work for our balloon sim. So I'm just gonna try right clicking, hit current state to object. We'll hide our remesh. And we might even put this in a new null by hitting Alt G and then calling this hidden. And we'll just hide this to be safe. So if we need any copies of anything, I'll put it in there. But here is our remeshed branch that's using quads now. And we have a vertex map since we added the tag before. So I'm going to go back to our camera view. We'll put our backdrop back on. I'll hit NA to get rid of the wireframe view. So in our vertex map, just hit use transfer and you'll get access to the fields area. And for the moment, I'm going to delete this freeze option. So we have nothing in here right now affecting our scene. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down on the linear field button and I'm going to locate the spherical field. And you'll see that when we add that, it puts a sphere in the center. And depending on where I drag this, it changes the vertex map to yellow. And yellow is 100% intensity and red is 0. Or it might be flip-flopped, but you get the idea. Wherever this field is, it's affecting that map to show 100% or 0%, depending on the red or yellow. So basically what we can do is, with fields, we can control how we have a growth effect and what shape it starts at and where it starts at, depending on this spherical field that we just created. So I'm going to make this much smaller, and I'm going to drag this, maybe we'll start at this end since this seems to be the base of the branch, and I'm going to drag this down, and I might increase the feathering so that there's more contrast, but I might take the size down really small. So it's a very, very small point here at the end of the branch. And we can actually pause our IPR because that's just going to slow us down a little. So again, we have that spherical field down here. Now what we can do in the vertex map is if we add the freeze back in, we'll add that to the top, and you want it to be above the spherical field, and you want to add it after you add the spherical field, because if you don't, if you have the freeze in there to start and then you add the spherical field, it will just be blank because it's frozen on whatever it starts with or whenever that freeze is in place. But anyway, we have the freeze in there. If we change the mode from none to grow, it will start to grow this vertex map along the entirety of the branch for our animation. So if we hit play, we now have a growing vertex map. But it is pretty fast, and it's kind of more faded. Like there's a longer edge distance than I want. So I'm going to actually change this radius here to maybe like 3 centimeters, and that will slow it down and also will make the fade a little bit smaller. So as you can see, we have a sharper edge to our vertex map. We're also not using enough frames here. It cuts off before it can finish. So I'm going to set this to 300. So let's see what that does. So we may need to even up the radius a little bit, maybe to 5. So let's try that. I think that's much better, and we should finish our animation by then. So that's good. And I want it to kind of finish around 200, so we have some extra time, because I envision that we're gonna add another vertex map that will kind of erase all this, because I want the ballooning effect to happen, but then I also want things to go back to normal so that I can create an easier loop animation, like I did in the scene that I showed you guys at the start. So we have our basic growing effect, but this is a little bit boring, to be honest. We just have a straight edge growing along the branch. So one thing we can do to make that more interesting is by adding some noise in there to kind of break up the straightness of the growing edges. So we can do that by going to our spherical field, finding a shader field, and it won't do anything by default. We need to go into the shader little drop down and choose noise. And you'll see it changes so the whole branch is using the noise now, but that's not what we want. We actually want to set this to overlay, and then it'll just affect the edges of our vertex map. So if we play along here, you can see that now the edges are not perfectly straight, but we can mess with this a little bit further if we click into the noise, and now we can start changing some of these details. So we can play with size, which you can take this much further down. You can see we're affecting that little edge on the branch, and we could also up the contrast, so you could be really crazy with it, or you could do something a little bit softer. And you can also change the noise type if you wanted, so you could do FBM, you could do whatever your heart desires. For noise fun, let's just see what that's like. So now we've got something interesting there. I do actually think I'll try FBM. And I might increase the scale to 80. And I mean, you can take this further too. You can add another shader field. So we could duplicate that. Set that one to overlay as well. Add our noise. And maybe for this one, we'll set the scale to like 400. And we'll increase contrast. And let's see what that looks like. So now we've got some tiny noise affecting that surface, but we also have bigger noise affecting the shape too. So I like that. I think that will make for a good sim. So we're going to hit save, just Control S. And let's name this to growing vertex map. So now what I need to do actually is I'm going to add our balloon tag. So we're going to go click on our branch, right click, go to simulation tags, and we have balloon right here. And we're going to go into balloon and we're going to set the overpressure maybe to 3 to start. And if we just hit play, it'll just balloon the entire branch. So that's not really what we want, and it falls because we have gravity on. So let's hit Control and D on our keyboard, find the simulation tab, go to scene, and here we can turn off our gravity. So now when we hit play, it should just balloon the whole branch in place. And it does. So you're seeing that here. However, I don't want it to just affect the whole thing at once. I want this to follow our vertex map that we just made. So you can see we have the map section in a bunch of different areas, and we can pull our vertex map right in there. So if we pull our vertex map into the ballooning, you'll see we get the exact thing you might expect. It's going to balloon just along where that vertex map is growing. But I also kind of want this branch to try to stay in place a little bit as it's growing too, and as it's ballooning, because that'll give it kind of almost the foamy look that my animation had. In mix animation, we have pinning and force. I'm just going to hit with pins. I'm going to set this somewhat low. We'll try 20% to start, and we're going to pull our vertex map in there too. And let's see what we get. So now you can see the rest of the branch stays in place even as the growing effect happens. Okay, so I think this is what I did to make kind of a foaming look. So if I set this to 15, you're going to see now when the ballooning happens, it's almost like those insulation foam you spray in houses. Like it kind of stays more in place. So I really like that. I think that's super cool, but it's not ballooning now as much. So this is where you can kind of change the overpressure in the balloon tab. So I'm going to set this to 5. Let's try it now. So really funky. It's almost like fluid that's freezing in place, but I think it's really cool. Yeah, so I really like that. I think that's awesome. And you could just use this effect, but again, if we want it to loop, we're going to have to find a way to transition back to the normal state. So what I'm going to do for the moment is just create a null, which we can use to put our balloon tag on it so that we don't have to worry about any weird interactions as we're trying to mess with the vertex map. So I'm going to just call this balloon placeholder. And we're just going to drag our balloon tag on there so we can keep all the settings and just drag it back onto our branch when we need it. Let's revisit the vertex map. So we have our first one and it's all set and that's what we want, but we need to create another vertex map. So I'm just going to click on our icon and control drag to create a copy. And this will be our second one, which we want to rename, but we can just delete everything that's in here for now. Now we can rename it. Let's go to the vertex map and we'll call this erasing map. And I'm also going to change the color. So we can do that by going to icon. We can choose icon color and we can set this to anything we want. Maybe I'll choose green. And you can see now up here, we have a different vertex map color icon. So we can help differentiate those. So for the second vertex map, we're basically going to do the same thing we did for the first, but we want this to have a different timing. So we'll have a spherical field still. So actually what we could do is we could make a copy of this spherical field out here. We'll call it spherical field 2, and we'll drag this into our vertex map. And we can keep it there in the same exact position, but now what we're going to do is pull in the freeze. We'll set this one to grow also, and maybe we'll set this to 5 as well. And we'll do our same process as before, pull in the shader maps. So I'm also going to drag that shader field above so it's out of the branch remesh. And we'll set this one to overlay as well. Cool, so I like that. The only other thing though is if this is going to be subtracting our first vertex map, we don't want it to start right at 0 because we actually want to see our growth effect. So the way we can do that is we can go to the freeze and we could set the effect strength at 0 to 0%, and it'll add a keyframe. And then we can move maybe to 60 and we'll set the keyframe for 100% and we'll keyframe that. And let's also move our 0 keyframe to maybe 50 because I want it to stay at 0 until we get to 50 and then it'll start to grow. So let's see that. Perfect. So that way we're going to give it some time to really see our ballooning growth before it starts subtracting it. Let's move our keyframes to maybe 190, and let's see if it ends kind of right about where we need it to. So it's still a little fast, so I might bring those keyframes to 120 and 130. So that might be just right, or we can do 110 and 120. We'll actually call this erasing growth map. And then we need to make one final map. So we'll call this erasing map. And so we have our erasing growth and our erasing map. We'll change the color for the final one to maybe like a pink color to differentiate this one too. And in fields, we'll delete everything. We also want to make sure we don't have keyframes on this one. But now we can just combine the other two sims. So we're going to grab our first growth vertex map, grab our second growth vertex map, pull that in there. And we're going to set this one to, I believe it's subtract. So if we hit play, we're going to see our growth, and then at frame 110, we're going to see the subtraction. That's exactly what you want to see. That is kind of how you achieve the actual effect. But now we need to plug our balloon tag back onto our branch. Let's also kind of organize some of our fields here. And for our balloon tag, we need to adjust this now. We need to use the final vertex map. So we're going to go to balloon. We'll grab our erasing map. Actually, we'll change the name on this to ballooning map because this is our guide for the ballooning effect. So we've changed the map that the balloon tag is now using. So it's now using our ballooning map. And I don't think we plugged it anywhere else, so let's just take a look at what that is like now. And because we've got some combination here, it will slow down your scene a little bit to play back. So just be mindful of that. But we should now see the subtraction take place. So it is happening, but it is pretty jittery. So I think we can do a couple things to help this. Number one, we might have to play with the mix animation influence. Maybe we want to take this to 20%. And then I think also we haven't played with the surface of the ballooning yet at all. Okay, friends, so I spent the last hour or so trying to fix this jerkiness in my simulation, trying a bunch of different settings. I really don't know what is causing this to happen, as you can see. It's almost like halfway through the sim, the ballooning force just like would up all the way or just up in strange spots. And I know it's usually in parts of the mesh where there is more like thickness. So it really balloons up in those thicker little areas. But I am definitely confused as to where the jerkiness comes from. I even pulled all of my things into a new scene. I tried a bunch of different settings. I will just show you what I ended up with. So I went for 250 for bendingness, and I actually started using the combined ballooning map in my map area there. I put 25 for the stretchiness and thickness to 0.5. I don't have any bounciness, friction, or stickiness, and then the target length is 110, and I also am using that ballooning map there. In the balloon, I only have the force set to 2, and I am using my ballooning map there as well. And then on mix animation, I have my pins at work here, but I'm also using force, and that's where I'm plugging in the ballooning map. And then if we go to our simulation settings, I have smoothing iteration set to 8 and damping set to 10. So I might spend some more time just tweaking this to try to fix the second half of the animation where that jerkiness starts. I don't know why it's so smooth at the beginning and so jerky towards the end, so that's definitely something I would play with. But as you can see, my branch is also spinning, and that is just a single keyframe, or that is just a simple keyframe, excuse me. Nothing at frame 0, and then 360 degrees towards the end so that it looks like a perfect loop. So yeah, I don't think there's anything else really to be mindful of here. I did scale my branch down and then changed some of these numbers on the freeze, so just it was a little bit more closer to accurate scale. Freeze is set to 4 centimeters on the first map. It's set to 1.8 for the second one. That will actually work as the eraser. And then obviously the combined looks like this. I did also add a delay, which is giving it a softer fade. Setting the delay to smooth our spring will kind of give us a nice, more faded outlook to the subtraction there. So let's actually dive into growing some particles now, because that's another fun part. And again, we're just gonna ignore the jerkiness of the sim for the moment. Okay, so I'm gonna go to a midpoint in my simulation, maybe something like here. And I'm gonna duplicate my camera and just get like a close-up shot maybe, so I can come in here later. So this is actually pretty simple because we already have our vertex maps. So what we're gonna do is we are actually gonna pull in the matrix scatter. You could also do a cloner. I'm gonna do the matrix scatter. And we are gonna set this to object mode. And we are gonna set this to our branch here. And it will add particles all across the branch, little dots like you see there. But I don't want to just use their spheres. I actually want to make my own because I'm going to be adding my own material. So in my render, I did like little glass balls. So I'm going to grab a sphere. Let's pull this up into our view so we can see it. And then I'm going to take the scale way down, maybe like only 1 centimeter in width, and then maybe we set this to 20 for the segments and icosahedron. Then for our matrix, we're going to click on the redshift object tag, and in the particle section, we can change the optimize spheres to custom objects, and this is where we can set whatever mesh we want to be scattered. So I'm just going to drag my sphere in there, and I'm also going to create a simple glass material. We'll just call this glass. We'll drag that onto our sphere, and we're going to make that fully transmissive. I don't want this to be very rough, and I'm going to set the IOR to be around 1.8. They're on there. Let's up the scattering count so that we can see these. Maybe like 200. And they're still a little bit hard to see. They are there though. So what we're going to do to make that a little bit easier to see is we're going to add a random field. And we're going to change the parameter so it's not affecting position. I just want this to affect the scale by 1. So it'll double these in size, or it will completely erase them. Maybe we even want to do 2. Got some randomness here. Some of the spheres are quite small. Some are like 2 times the size or 4 times the size. We want to have them only show up when our ballooning effect is taking place. The way we actually do that is by adding a plane. So I'm going to grab up the plane effector. I'm going to turn off the position. We're going to set scale to -1. And then we are going to drag our vertex map into that field area. And we want to make sure that in the effectors tab of our matrix, our plane is in there. So let's take a peek here. We might have to invert that. Yeah. So right now it's doing the reverse of what we want. So let's go to the plane. We're going to go to our fields and we're going to invert. And now it should just grow along our ballooning area. Just like that. So yeah, they're only growing with the ballooning areas. And I'm just gonna show you now how to make the material because I think we're at a spot where we can do that. It just would look a little bit nicer to see some of these spheres with the change of the material. We are going to create a new material. I am going to first drag in our vertex attribute and drag our ballooning vertex map right in this attribute name area because we'll use that shortly. And then I'm going to bring in a material blender and we'll put that here. And actually I want this to be in the layer 1 material color. And I'm going to go in and select all of the maps and nodes in my wood material. And I'm going to bring that into this new material we just created. And let me just organize a little bit here. Okay, something like that. So we want our wood material to be the base material. And the thing that's going to actually blend between those is our vertex map. So this is going to say, all right, we're going to use this wood material until we have an area of the vertex map that's 100%, which will then use this material color. So this is how we determine whatever material we want to be showing up here in the ballooned areas. So first though, let's drag our new material over the branch and let's save. And as you can see, we now have that new material showing up on our branch. If you want to dial this in a little bit further, you could plug your vertex map into a ramp and then let's visualize that. So you can see it there, and we could just take the strength there all the way down to a spot that we like. So it might be like right here maybe. And you could even add some noise if you want to add some kind of rings to it like I had in my render. A couple other things that I did for this material. One of the key components is using the color layer node. And this is kind of like a system like Photoshop where you can layer up different things, use masks, really create something unique with all of these layers that were allowed. So I'm going to grab a color absolute node, and this will work as just our base color. So I'm going to set this to, we'll do like a fun orange color, which is different than the blue that I used in my render. I'm going to turn off layer 1 for right now. And we're also going to plug this into our subsurface color just to be ahead. But then the other thing that I did to add some like darker colors around wherever the bubbles were is I brought in the curvature node. You can see certain areas turn white depending on like where these creases are and whatnot. And that's set to convex. I think I ended up doing concave. So concave is going to put white areas wherever there are like these creases or edges or maybe some contact spots. So you can see that anywhere there's a bubble or anywhere there's a crease in the ballooning, we're seeing white. So this can also work now as a mask for whatever we want. So I'm going to add a ramp after this so that we have a little bit more control over how thick or intense that contrast is. So I'm going to plug that in there, and I'm going to plug this into the mask for our layer 1. And before I play around with any of the strength or the radius there, I'm just going to re-enable color layer 2, and now you can see we have some black color showing over top of our orange. So I'm actually going to change this to kind of a pink, and then this is where I'm also going to take my radius up for our curvature, so maybe 2, and that'll make it more faded. So we also want to take our ramp in. Okay, so something like that, and then if we unsolo it, we should see red in any of those areas where the bubbles are and where any creases are. So I do want that to be still a little bit more intense, so I'm just going to add another ramp. We'll call that good. This is also where we could take the color in a little bit further as well. We get a little bit more contrast. Yeah, something like that is nice. The only other thing left to do for this material is to create some kind of fun surface for our bump map. So I'm going to plug a bump map node in. And what I ended up doing was using one of my sponge textures, which you can actually get from my sponge shader that's on my Gumroad. It's one of those textures, and I just plugged that into the bump map. But you could also grab just a max on noise. And with this max on noise, we can just plug that into our bump map, and let's solo that so we can see what we're working with. And I'll set the scale maybe to like 10. And then we can play around with the noise type. Nutuous is really fun, so is FBM. I think that one's cool. You could play with upping this octaves value a little bit to just create something really interesting. You could add some octaves for some small little more detail in there if you were to zoom in. We're looking at our texture now closer up, so you can see the surface that we are kind of projecting onto that material. So maybe Nutuous is not what you want. Maybe you want to do a Voronoi. That's totally an option too, a little bit more spongy looking, so that's kind of similar to what I had. I might also keep playing with these cycles, maybe up the contrast a little bit, play with the exponent value. That's really cool, so maybe that's where I'll unsolo that. You could also plug this max on noise into the color layer node, a mask for another layer. So we'll plug that into our color layer node, we'll enable layer 2. And maybe we want that color to be kind of another shade of orange, and I'll make it lighter. And then I am going to start playing with the subsurface. So for that, I'm going to up our subsurface to maybe like 0.5, take our radius down or our scale down. Maybe we want to play with a color or a purple. We'll just change kind of the undertone there. And I think I played also with the anisotropy. I ended up with about 0.53 for the weight, and then back to almost 1 for the scale, and just played around with the anisotropy value here. And now I think it's time to go back to our main camera. We can make this a little bit bigger here. Let's refresh. And then I think we could add maybe some lights to the scenes. I'm going to grab an area light just so I can rotate this 90 degrees. And I actually want to drag this out of view. And then I'm going to take the spread down and the intensity as well. I might even change the color of this to maybe a kind of blue tone. And then just for the sake of how this is filling the screen, I may just go back to more of a 16 by 9 format here. And let's play through this a little bit. Maybe our area light's a little bit intense yet. And maybe our color just blends a little bit too much in with the wood. So I'm gonna revisit that. Let's change our color. So I think that's kind of cool with more of a yellow undertone. You obviously don't see the rings around the bubbles as much with more of a lighter color, but I do think it's an interesting look. I'm gonna try plugging in our Maxon noise into the coat weight. I think that could be interesting. So that should add some shine in different areas for us. That's kind of the gist of it. Let's go back to our primary view. We could add some more bubbles if we want. Some more color in there too, which is nice. Yeah, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with the actual material. I think our area light's a little intense yet. Maybe I'll change our dome light. That's much nicer. I like the contrast with that one. But that's kind of the gist of it. I think that's a fun shot. So I'm gonna render this particular frame, but that's kind of how you create this Vertex map ballooning simulation. That's how we create our material separation, and then also how you grow particles. But yeah, that's pretty much how you do this kind of effect, guys. I hope you had fun. Hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. See ya.